first installment of our Founder Speaker Series. My name, if you don't know me, is Katie Geusz. I'm the Director of Programs here at Greentown. And this series is meant to highlight stories of resilience and creativity from both the Greentown community and beyond. Today, I will be speaking with Ben Glass, who is the CEO and CTO and founder of Altaeros. Before we get started, I have just a couple announcements here. So first of all, this event is being recorded for educational purposes and to be shared with the Greentown Labs community. Additionally, Greentown Labs may share relevant and appropriate sessions on its external social media channels for the benefit of the broader clean tech ecosystem. And then also everybody's going to be muted. So that means that if you have a question at any point, we will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. And so what you should do is just go ahead and drop that question into the chat box, and we'll save time for those at the end. All right, let's get started here. So Ben, thank you for being with us today. I have to say, when this event first came together, I was really excited to talk to you because I've heard so much about Altaeros as one of the founding companies of Greentown. I walked past your lab space on all the tours I gave, and I would try to tell the story as I understood it. But for those of us who don't know what Altaeros does, can you tell us just what is Altaeros and what problem does Altaeros solve?
Sure. What is Altaeros? That's an interesting question. I'll probably just go with what we're trying to solve, So, in a nutshell, we're trying to provide kind of the basic building blocks that everybody needs to live a modern life. So, things that most of us who live in cities take for granted, like energy and communications, connectivity, where if you go into a lot of rural communities, emerging markets, those kind of basic ingredients really are lacking. So where, the goal of Altaeros is to, leverage technology and innovation to be able to provide those basic building blocks to, underserved and unserved communities.
And is there a specific way that Altaeros does that?
Yeah. Well, we try to make everything fly because that's just fun. These days we're focused on providing connectivity as the sort of first building block that we're bringing to market, and we have developed what we call the super tower, which is basically an aerial cell tower. So our core technology is a autonomous aerostat. An aerostat is basically a big tethered blimp. It's something that's been around for a long time, but we've brought in some modern design and controls to take that basic technology and bring it into the commercial sphere to try to address some of these challenges. For connectivity in particular, the advantage is that you can take the same equipment that you put on a regular cell tower and lift it much higher than a regular tower, which allows you to cover a very large area. So for rural markets where people tend to be more spread out, you can cover a much larger area with fewer sites, which ends up being a much more cost-effective way to build basically cell infrastructure, connectivity infrastructure.
I just saw the video that your team put out, I think it was last week, where they were actually at the site, and you could see like the blimp being blown but remaining stable. It was just really cool to see. It almost looked like it was a fish swimming against the current.
Yeah, it's something that I think it's pretty sort of hopefully like elegant when it's up there, but there's a lot of work that the team has done that has gone into making it look elegant and stable and be able to withstand pretty much any conditions that are thrown at it.
Super cool, super cool. So can you tell us about how Altaeros got started?
Yeah, so the seed of Altaeros started as basically just a free time project that I got going in between undergrad and grad school. So my background's in aerospace engineering, and as I was finishing up undergrad, there was a study that came out, I believe at Stanford, that was kind of an assessment of the high altitude wind resource. And the soundbite takeaway from that was that there was 100 times more energy available in high altitude winds than we need to power civilization. So you could power civilization up 100 times over if you could cost effectively harness this resource. So as a aerospace engineering student interested in clean energy and infrastructure, that just seemed like a really interesting, exciting challenge and project to work on. So I started playing around with it, got some of the faculty in the aerospace department involved, and then ultimately brought it to a class at the Sloan School called Energy Ventures, which, as the name implies, you go through the process of starting an energy venture. And I ended up meeting my co-founders there. Adam Ryan, who probably a lot of folks knows on the board of Greentown, was actually the TA of the Energy Ventures course. And after, I think it was fall semester, so after the fall semester, I got together with Adam and a couple other students to kind of basically put together the team to go through all the business plan competitions. We did the Clean Energy Prize and a few others. And so we kind of had this sort of soft start, but by the time we were ready to graduate, there was enough momentum there and potential and interest in what we were doing to kind of take the leap and give it a shot. So yeah, that's how we got started as an airborne wind company.
And what was it about Adam that made you say, this is my co-founder, this is the person that I will create a company with?
His cutting wit and sense of fashion. No, I think we've been blessed with having a really good founding relationship because we have very different backgrounds. He's not a technical background, and so we approach problems in a very different way, but more often than not, we arrive at the same conclusion from different directions, which is, I think, I don't know, rare and quite effective, but we also are kind of, we're both sort of no bullshit, so we can be quite frank and open and honest, which is, I think, super important.
Do you think it's important for co-founders to have that sort of complementary skill set, like one person who's more technical and one person who's more either, strategic or business oriented or something like that?
It's certainly, I think it's, yeah, I would say it's you know, there's a whole lot that needs to happen to start a company. And so between the founding team, you need to kind of cover the basic sets of skills. But founders tend to be fairly quick at learning stuff. So I wouldn't say it's not necessarily required, but it's helpful if you come into it with a complementary skill set.
And a good sense of fashion, which is very important in any founding team. Well, can you tell us anything about the early days at Greentown, since Altaeros was one of the 4 companies that really made it all happen back in the dilapidated warehouse in East Cambridge that I've heard so much about?
Yeah, it was super fun. Trying to think what I can tell in a session that's recorded. The parties were great, and we'll leave it at that. No, it was a great environment because it really sort of happened organically, because we were the 4th of the 4 companies, and we basically just needed some cheap, grungy space to start building some of the super early prototypes, and we had no money, and I think we ended up just paying for our space with basically consulting services to one of the other companies. So it was a really collaborative environment, and we had no idea that Greentown was going to grow to what it currently is. We sort of figured, well, we started out in this as you said, decrepit warehouse. We were there for, I think, like 6 or 9 months before they knocked it down to build a nicer building. And we were like, there's got to be a few other companies, startups in the Boston area that could use a space like this. So we said, let's actually open something a little bit more formal and see if others are interested. And then it grew way beyond what we imagined.
And what was the ethos like among all the companies that were there, like really scrappy and just starting out? Like, what did it feel like to be part of that group?
Yeah, I think the physical space sort of filtered out anybody who wasn't super scrappy, because it was real grungy. But I think there was a joint sense of, we were all building hardware, which is hard, and so many startups are just just writing code, and they basically just need a desk, internet connection, and coffee. And so there was a sense of bonding over the challenges of building hardware that made it a very communal environment.
So the sense of community and scrappiness is almost like just into the Greentown DNA from the very beginning. I think it's so cool to hear these stories of what you guys were doing in those early days when you really didn't have much, right? You really just had this dilapidated warehouse and some other folks who were doing some cool stuff and some big dreams.
Yeah, no, it was quite scrappy.
I actually want to just ask the question real quick. Are you getting feedback? Can you hear feedback when I talk? Can anybody else on the call hear feedback? Okay, I can hear some feedback. Nobody else hears it, then we will keep going. That's great. Fabulous.
On my end.
Good. Okay, cool. Oh, there's the chat.
Oh, Nina's just saying the sound is perfect.
Oh, great. Okay, great. Thank you, Nina. So let's talk about 2014 and 2015 for Altaeros. You guys had been going for a couple years at that point, and you had to really rethink your business model. Can you tell us the story of what led you to have to rethink some of what you were doing and what that process was like?
Yeah, so I think maybe just sort of getting us to that point, we had been a very small, very scrappy little startup. We were, reasonably successful with like SBIRs and state and federal grants, but really had raised some angel sort of seed round money, but really had very little resources. But were able to put together some, they didn't work great, but they worked well enough proof of concept prototypes. And from that, we were able to raise a larger round that was led by SoftBank. So we closed that in actually the day before Thanksgiving in 2014. It was a very good Thanksgiving. And literally at the exact same time, the price of oil just tanked. And we, talked about the goal is to build, infrastructure and these building blocks in rural communities. So with the airborne wind turbine, we were essentially directly competing against diesel generators. And when we started the company and oil was $100 a barrel, a 30 to 50 kilowatt airborne wind turbine for rural communities and off-grid businesses made a lot of sense. But kind of overnight, the price of oil went to like $35 a barrel, and all of a sudden, kind of our almost our entire advantage in that market just dissolved overnight. Fortunately, it was right around the same time that the kind of importance of data and connectivity, was going from being a luxury to something that's just an absolutely essential part of modern life in so many different respects. And so when the energy market dissipated, we realized, well, we've got a great technology, but all of a sudden our market is gone. And so we explored, what other revenue streams can we generate? Originally it was, can we add on something onto the airborne wind turbine to generate a secondary revenue stream? But over the process of evaluating that, we ultimately came to the conclusion that the right decision for the business was to focus entirely on the connectivity market. So take the airborne platform that we had developed and adapt it into the telecom sector. So it was, certainly from a market perspective, a pretty huge pivot. From a mission perspective, it was a lot less so. It wasn't that, energy connectivity are sort of two parts of those basic building blocks. There was a lot of the sort of sustainability aspect of our DNA was very much still there. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting time, especially to have closed funding and then almost immediately have to go back to our investors and say, oh, remember that business that you just invested in us to pursue? Well, it's gone, and we think we have to completely change the direction that we're going.
And so you have spent years building this one business model, and you've just closed a funding round on that business model. You're feeling really, really good about it. And then all of a sudden, this exogenous event happens and totally calls into question everything that you and your team have been working on, and all of the promises you've made to your investors, all of the expectations that you had, and excitement and success that you've had. What did that feel like to sit in that seat and read about what was happening with oil and realize what this meant for you?
I don't really dwell on, what it feels like. The world is a fickle place. The reality changed, and, you either get frustrated by that or you just adapt to the new situation. And so, it was pretty clear that we had to do something. And then it was a matter of figuring out what's the best thing to do and getting everybody on board with that.
And so do you think that sort of framing allowed you to move quickly and to make the hard decision that really had to be made?
Yeah, it's only a hard decision if you dwell on, if you're overly tied to what you were doing. Which, we're all tied to what we're doing, but we have to be responsive to, the reality. And so I think I made the decision pretty quickly, and then it was about getting everybody else on board. And that, that was probably a 6-month process to get everybody else on board, between the team, the investors, all of our external stakeholders. We were in the middle of a grant with the Alaska Energy Authority, and we had to figure out how to gracefully exit that since we were no longer building a wind turbine. So yeah, that was probably about a 6-month process to do that. And yeah, during that period, I think we lost one team member who was just very focused and passionate about the energy side of the business. We got our board, our investors all on board, and I think in hindsight, it was absolutely the right decision.
Did you ever second guess yourself, or you were just so focused on not looking back and just making it work?
Yeah, you second guess yourself all the time, but that's not super productive. So you just have to ignore that, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. So I think I mentioned this in one of our previous discussions. So Ratan Tata is one of our early angel investors, and the favorite quote that he ever said to me was that there's no such thing as good decisions and bad decisions. There's only decisions, and you work to make them good. And so that was a great example of that, where you don't know if it's the right decision, but there's not really a right decision. So you just have to make the decision and then focus on, what can we do to make sure that the decision we just made ends up being a good decision. And so that was sort of the mindset that we took.
I love that quote. I've never heard that before, but just the idea of making a decision and then making it the good decision, making it the right decision by how you bring it into action. I mean, I think that's so powerful, and it really helps you kind of get outside of analysis paralysis and have a bias toward action.
Yeah, it's so, analysis paralysis is such a big problem, because if you don't make any decision, you're guaranteed to die. So that's, analysis paralysis is a big enemy. And I think, yeah, that quote is helpful to avoid it for sure.
And as the founder, how did you keep yourself going through that time?
So that one was not, that was pretty easy, because it was still, I think starting the company as hopefully every founder is super passionate about whatever the impact and the cause is. And in making the pivot to the super tower from we call it the buoyant airborne turbine, or the BAT, pivoting from the BAT to the super tower and from energy to telecom, the potential impact and sort of positive change that we could have, I would say, was in many ways increased, because we were going from a very niche part of the energy market and moving into a huge part of the connectivity market, where our impact could potentially be magnified significantly. And on top of all of that, from like a pure kind of environmental sustainability part, which was quite important to me, to Adam, I think to a lot of the team, our approach to rural connectivity was, I would often say that we're an energy efficiency company masquerading as a telecom company, because by deploying super towers instead of regular towers, we're able to cut out at least half of the energy consumption in an industry that is oftentimes powered by diesel generators. And so right off the bat, we're having probably potentially an even bigger environmental sustainability impact versus the sort of niche off-grid energy generation. So that was, from all of the kind of impact aspects, it was something we could still be super proud about.
And do you think that was important for bringing your team along in the pivot as well?
I think that was important for bringing me along. It was important for bringing Adam along. I think it was, I think it was quite important for a lot of the team. It was interesting that you learn about everybody's, what motivates each person during something like that, because I would say, some people, that sort of impact, positive change was super important. Some people were, motivated by, working on a super cool engineering project. Some people are motivated by the, business potential. Everybody has different motivations.
And what do you think about the role of like the trust that you had built with your team through the years? What do you think that played, and how do you even think about that?
So that was, I think that most of the team was quite new. I mean, literally in November, we were like 4 or 5 people, and by June, we were probably, 15, 16 people. So we had basically, tripled or quadrupled in size. So there wasn't necessarily that pivot was, I think, certainly helped by the openness and honesty and like, I think we tried to sort of fairly assess the situation. From like the team's perspective, it wasn't as challenging as some situations, because we had just raised money. So it wasn't like a question of, are we going to go out of business? It was a question of, what are we doing, and can we do something worthwhile? I think because we had just started building, really building the team, we were still building the trust through that. And I think in navigating a situation like that, it helped us to build a lot of trust between the team, which is, I think, super, super important.
Definitely, super, super important. How about with your investors? What did that conversation look like? Trying to walk them through this transition of how this new market would be a lot better, but it still was consistent with the overall original vision.
Yeah. So by the time we were really pivoting away from energy, we had three large investors: SoftBank, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and Sewell Bowen. SoftBank being the lead and the largest of those three. And I think we were very fortunate in that SoftBank invested invested around the energy business, but they also happened to be one of the largest telecom companies in the world. And so the pivot to telecom was obviously very, they could understand that. It wasn't a quick conversation with them or any of the investors. It really did probably take 6 months to, from the initial, hey, we think we might need to pivot, we think this may be the direction to go, to them, being fully on board. They, to their credit, they didn't say yes or no initially. They said, okay, we understand the situation, show us the data, show us the plan, show us what you think you need to do. And over those 6 months, having that dialogue with them, we got them to be fully on board. And it was interesting because the other two investors, Mitsubishi and Sewell Bowen, are not in the telecom space, and they were definitely strategic investors around the energy business, and were no longer strategic investors around the telecom business. But they also came to the conclusion that it was the right decision, despite the fact that it wasn't aligned with their strategic interests.
So it sounds like it was quite a process to really kind of guide them along. And it's good, like you said, that they gave you that opportunity to make your case with some data and not to say yes or no right away. For those of us who weren't in this industry in 2014 or 2015, what did it feel like to be a clean tech startup when the price of oil came crashing down?
Terrible. I think there are a lot of momentum around clean energy and renewables was really, really destroyed, or at least significantly reduced during the years following that. It was unfortunate times. I think probably a lot of the older Greentown companies can sort of talk to what it was like to go through that. And I think, we were quite fortunate in our ability to sort of pivot into a sector that wasn't impacted by that, by the impact on oil prices, but that could still have a sustainability impact.
So I noticed when we started our conversation and I asked you to describe Altaeros, you didn't start off by telling me that Altaeros is a aerostat that provides rural connectivity. You told me that it is a resource company that provides resources to people in areas that would otherwise be hard to reach. And so I wonder if that pivot has kind of changed the way that you think about what your company does and caused you to think about it maybe at a level up here rather than commit yourself or lock yourself into any particular means or technology. Just, even psychologically, did that flip the way that you think about the work that you do?
I think that it might actually be the other way around, where I have always thought of it here, which made the pivot that much easier. And that's probably why I was not emotionally attached to the technology. Like, engineering the technology is a tool to get to where you want to be. It's not an end all be all of itself. And so I think I always thought of Altaeros as as the infrastructure and services to under unserved communities, regardless of what the specific technology tools might be. So yeah, that probably just made the pivot that much easier.
That's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. And I think what it reminds me of is when I hear people like Joe Reif or Mitch Tyson talk about customer discovery, and they always have such an emphasis on, your company is not necessarily your product. Your company is the problem that you're solving for the customers that you're solving it for. And I think, having that kind of a framing, it seems like it really did help you pivot quite quickly and to maintain that vision of the value that you were providing and who your stakeholders were, while changing the means by which you deliver that value.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, like I said, it's the impact that you have that's important. And if you can work on cool technology to get there, then all the better.
So you mentioned to me when we talked last time that while the experience that Altaeros went through in 2015 was challenging, it was definitely not the most difficult thing that Altaeros has ever faced. So what would you say has been Altaeros' most difficult experience to date?
Yeah, I think like we talked about, we went through last year probably the most challenging point where telecom is very much a new sector, and I'm still learning a ton about it. We've obviously hired people with a lot of great expertise in that, but what we're doing is very different from how most of the big telcos are used to, or different from what they're used to. And we've had to learn a lot of hard lessons, and we had made some, in hindsight, sort of wrong decisions on who and what types of customers to focus on. And ultimately, so last year, we thought we were a lot closer to landing a very attractive contract than we were, and it just turned out that the momentum and inertia in the big telcos is as bad as it is as people talk about. And unfortunately, the timing for that to happen was quite terrible because we were going into a fundraise. We had, at the end of 2018, we had an investor submit a term sheet and then back out of the deal. And then we were picking the fundraise back up in mid 2019. And unfortunately, given the customer traction was not where we thought it was going to be, ultimately did not have a successful fundraise. And through that period, had to make a lot of very difficult decisions in terms of, we had to have salary reductions across the board. We ended up having to go through a round of layoffs. And this is not a story that we've told broadly outside of Altaeros, but we came within 2 days of having to shut the company down. That is a very difficult situation. It's the hardest decision I've ever had to make is to go through layoffs. And we, agonized over it, and I think tried to do as good a job as we could in treating, our employees who were leaving with as much respect and dignity as possible. And we've since been able to hire a number of them back. So I think we did a reasonably good job there. But yeah, so that period was quite challenging. And I think, we did everything we could to buy ourselves as more time to basically do everything we can to try to get through that. And we were, I think, extremely fortunate to survive that period and have some additional funding come in the nick of time, and sort of a real reversal of fortunes. And the months since then, the last 4 or 5 months have been really exciting. But yeah, that was probably the most difficult period that we've been through at Altaeros.
Do you think there was anything that you learned from the 2015 experience that helped you in last year's experience?
I think make the difficult decisions quickly, and most importantly, make the difficult decisions. Because if you don't make the difficult decisions, you're not going to have the opportunity to succeed and to survive. I think that through this process, probably the thing that I'm most proud of is that we had almost no voluntary attrition, and I think that we're very open and honest and transparent, and really value transparency and honesty across the company. And I think that level of openness and fosters a level of trust that I think is what is needed to get through a situation that's that difficult. If there's not built-in trust, and you can't build trust during a crisis, you have to build it before a crisis. And if you don't have that level of trust at every level of the organization, then I think it'd be very, very difficult to survive a crisis mode.
Yeah. Having almost zero voluntary attrition during a time like that is it's just amazing. And I think it really goes to show, like you said, the amount of trust that can't be built during a crisis. You really have to build that over years and years. And I think what you say about transparency and honesty is so interesting. I'm thinking of the folks that I know from Altaeros that I've worked with through Greentown launch. So Peter Mitten and Sherry Palazzo, and both of them are so straightforward and good communicators. And I'm always struck when I talk with them about just how clear and the clarity of thought that they bring to a conversation. And it's why they're such great mentors for the program. Is there anything else that you think is a really core Altaeros value?
Well, we have a whole set of values that I'm not going to go into in depth here. But I think the one that I will say is fun. We're building freaking flying cell towers and wind turbines. So if we're not having fun doing that, then something horrible is wrong. So that I think is actually one of our core values, and it's, I think, I take it very seriously, ironically. But I think it's quite important. Also, who doesn't want to have fun? It's an interesting filter for hiring too, because we've definitely made some mistakes where we hired people that were sort of on paper great for the role, but didn't check the fun box. And it was so clearly, in every case, it's been such a clear cultural mismatch. Not that they're not great people, and not that they're not good at their jobs. They're just not good at their jobs at Altaeros because of that cultural mismatch.
Do you think that the fun is part of the resilience that helps you get through the hard times?
Yeah, probably. I mean, if you weren't having fun, I think you'd be a lot quicker to leave a company if you're not having fun there.
Very true. Very true. Very wise words. I'm going to turn it over to some Q&A here. I think we've got about 15 minutes left. So one question, I'm going to look at the chat, and if anyone has any other questions, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. But one question here from Munir: does the transition to 5G affect your product specifications, design, and/or business model? If so, how?
It's definitely something that we're taking into account. I think 5G is this sort of funny catch-all buzzword where it's not super well defined, but it definitely gets everybody's attention. So we're excited about the sort of wave of infrastructure investment that will go into building out the 5G networks. And I think that my hope is that, if you look historically how 4G, 3G, all of the technologies, they always start in the urban centers where you have the densest populations, and then they slowly filter out to rural areas. And there's still large parts of this country that don't have LTE. one of the neat things about 5G is that some of the applications that are enabled by 5G are by their very nature rural centric or remote centric, things like agricultural IoT that's enabled by 5G, the potential to have sort of fixed wireless broadband in rural markets where it's just too expensive to build copper or fiber. That one's works both in urban and rural, and so the hope is that there's going to be a more if not starting in rural, at least a more even rollout between rural and urban. And I think certainly a lot of the promises that some of the big players in the market are making would, if they fulfill those promises, would suggest that. So yeah, we're definitely looking at all of the sort of wider range of applications that we can help enable that are related to 5G. It's in terms of sort of the specifications, though, it's kind of a the super tower is a platform, and we can deploy really any number of payloads. So 5G is a subset of the payloads that you can deploy. LT is a subset, so on and so forth.
How about this question here? This one's a little bit different, from Jason Etier. How did your use of funds change for your round with the change in your business plan?
Well, we were no longer developing a wind turbine. It was a bit of going back to the beginning, because we needed to completely learn. We needed to learn an entire new industry, and we needed to pivot the product. And so we ended up hiring a number of consultants in the telecom space to help kind of kickstart the development or the understanding of that market from a business model perspective. It was less the use of funds and more the fact that we had a sort of a almost brand new team that we kind of took the opportunity to take sort of a clean sheet view of the technology, so that we could take everything that we learned from our prior prototypes, all of the new fresh perspectives that we had on the team, and sort of blend all of that to develop the product. But that required almost a restart of the development thought process on the technology. But obviously, with the funding and the fact that we were in a new market, there was, it was a lot of going back to the beginning.
And how did you navigate some of those conversations with the investors, since they had just given you this money and you had just laid out a plan for how you were going to use it, and then all of that changed?
I mean, you almost go through the investment diligence process again, where you have to build a new plan, a new business model, and go through that. Except instead of during investor pitch sessions, we're doing this during board meetings.
Wow. One question here in the chat from Mark Vasu. How many installations or customers do you have now, and is North America your focus?
We have a R&D center in southern New Hampshire, where we have a unit that we've used as basically a test platform, demo platform for a number of customers. I can't go into any details, but I can say that we just signed our first contract, which is a huge milestone for us. We are largely North America focused to start, but not exclusively. And so we are looking at some early deployments elsewhere in the world.
Here's another question. How did you approach selecting and locking in your first customer?
Given how different what we're doing is to what all of our customers are used to, I think we couldn't be too picky. This is not a commodity where it's just a substitution for something that they're used to, and so we've cast a pretty wide net. You know, everybody. Everybody's really excited about the potential of what we're doing, but nobody wants to be first. Everybody races to be second when it comes to such a different solution. And so, you know, we cast a wide net and tried to sort of filter down to the customers that were really, you know, serious as quickly as possible. We also have learned a ton just within the telecom sector, and have actually even within that space pivoted our, you know, market focus and the product focus a few times to really find that initial product market fit. And I think, you know, the most recent one of those sort of product market pivots within the telecom space has really been over the last 4 or 5 months, and I think has, you know, based on everything we've learned and this response and traction that we're seeing now, I think we've finally really hit on that initial product market fit, which provides an entry point, sort of a foot in the door with a number of customers to expand into larger contracts, larger impact. So that first product that we're going to market with, which we haven't we're talking about it, but we haven't really publicly announced it yet, is essentially it's a smaller version of the super tower targeted towards like emergency response, things like that, something that's portable, transportable, relocatable. So it's a little bit lower sort of barrier to entry for a lot of our customers for them to try out an aerostat for the first time.
And how did you come to the conclusion that that would be a good addition to your portfolio?
Listening to customers, and then, you know, we've been talking about it for a while, and we sort of had plans for a while to include it in the portfolio, but sort of further down the line. And then we had some, you know, customers that were really, really interested in it, and you know, wanted us to accelerate it. That combined with a lot of the lessons and the inertia that we saw for the larger system, which again is a bigger hurdle to, you know, try out an aerostat, realized that this may be the right foot in the door.
Do you find that there was like a little bit of resistance with some customers that would be easier if you had kind of a smaller introductory product for them?
A lot of it comes down to sort of the flexibility of the business model. So the larger product, we were really looking at, you know, comping the tower co business model. So these are long-term, non-cancelable leases. So that's a big commitment. With a smaller unit that's portable and relocatable, the portability opens us up to more flexible business models. And so we can do shorter term leases. We can, you know, do a short-term rental for someone to try it. So there's just a lot more flexibility on how it can be used, which is important because, you know, for crisis response, you know, we want to be able to have a fleet of these that we can bring down to, you know, if there's a hurricane, if there's a forest fire, something like that, bring it down and deploy it for as long as needed, even if that's just a matter of weeks.
Wow. I mean, I can imagine being in a natural disaster and not having any internet. That would be a really tough situation. So I can see where there's a huge need for those sorts of flexible.
Internet is a luxury there. Even just being able to text or do basic calls to coordinate the relief effort is huge.
Wow. Here's another question. This is from Ryan Holy. He says, "Hey Ben, as I recall, Altaeros was capital efficient in the early days. Is there any advice you have for founders to maintain lean operations, and has this changed with new funding?"
We were super capital efficient. So I was on the solar car team at MIT, and I think that's where, you know, we were like a 6-person team that had to build and race an entire solar car. And I think that's where I learned to be scrappy and to, you know, get shit done with no resources. And that was a great sort of lesson and transition to starting a capital efficient hardware company. The first piece of advice is always ask your vendors if you can get a better deal. you'll be surprised at how often you can if you just ask. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Ryan was part of the early Altaeros team, so he can probably answer what it was like to work in a resource constrained environment. But yeah, you just have to be, creative on how to get things done. And maybe the other piece of advice is don't you at each step along the process, you have to make enough progress, but you don't have to shoot for the moon. You don't have to go from paper to a fully fleshed out, market ready product. There are intermediate steps that require less capital and less resources that can get you to the point where you can fundraise or get the additional resources you need to take the next step forward.
That almost sounds like it goes back to the concept of getting away from analysis paralysis, right? Like the whole concept of there's no perfect decision, you just have to make a decision and make it good, and being able to kind of chunk your work into those intermediate steps and break it down and bring people along with you. I would think that probably allows you to be a lot more resilient and scalable, and also like bring people along the journey, to invite them into that journey.
The other part of it is send your team to northern Maine, lock them in a hotel for 6 months in the middle of winter. It's amazing how much you can get done when there's absolutely nothing else to do. That was definitely helpful.
A little unorthodox, but it sounds effective.
Yeah, very effective.
Here's one other question. Munir says, Ben, how are you viewing incumbent technology companies like American Tower? Any prospective strategic partnerships?
Yeah, I think so. So American Tower, for those of you who don't know, is probably the largest tower company in the world. At least in the U.S., the tower company is dominated. The tower industry is dominated by three big public companies: American Tower, SBA, and Crown Castle. We know them quite well. Our VP of BizDev, Joe Ryan, was an early American Tower employee, and we've had a number of the sort of strategic partnership discussions, potentially investment discussions. They're definitely, I think their view is that we're still a little early and they want to see what we can do, and that's fine. I'm fine sort of staying under the radar for as long as possible with them. But I definitely think down the line they're a potential exit path, they're a potential strategic partner to expand the scale. I think in some cases we compete directly with them, in other cases less so. So yeah, it's definitely a multifaceted relationship there. And yeah, I would say you can kind of say the same thing about some of the less conventional competitors. Like, we often get compared with Google Loon, and Facebook had their now shuttered sort of solar internet drone project, where again, it's, in that case, I think a lot of us are going after the same goals, and so there may be some collaboration opportunities as well as a competitive dynamic.
So I'm being mindful of time here. My last question for you, Ben, is how are you guys doing right now? With everything going on, it sounds like you're in a really good place with the contract and your customer relationships, but with all the challenges that we're all facing right now, how are you guys doing?
Yeah, I think, these are weird times for everybody. I think we're super fortunate to be in a pretty good place, where most companies are laying people off. We're hiring right now. And I think we're extremely, blessed to be in that position. We closed some additional capital earlier in March, kind of right in the nick of time. So we're in a pretty good position. I think the team has done a great job of adapting to working remotely, and keeping everybody safe and healthy, and hopefully that continues, and you know, we'll get through these crazy times.
We certainly will. We certainly will. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your story with us. It's great to hear it firsthand. Every time I've told this story on a tour or whatnot, I've always wondered how much of my version was accurate. So now I know.
I'm sure it was almost entirely accurate.
Almost entirely. 80%, right? 80%. We're not going for 100%. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is a series we intend to continue, so we haven't lined up our next speaker just yet, but as soon as we do, we will announce that, hopefully about 3 weeks from now. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks.